We are here at the entrance to the lower church, and you pass through a little room to get here. And when the shrine was being built, Mother wasn't sure what it would be used for, but she knew the Lord would use it for something. And it was shortly after that that a man offered her a life-size exhibit of the Shroud of Turin, the reputed burial cloth of Christ. And this exhibit has both photographs of the actual shroud as well as photographic negatives in which the image is even clearer for us to see. And it goes back to 1898. An amateur photographer went to the cathedral in Turin. It was their 400th anniversary, and they were exhibiting the Shroud of Turin. And he was taking photographs, and later when he was developing them in the darkroom, he noticed something very unusual, that the images of the negatives were actually positives. In other words, the shroud itself is a photographic negative in a way. And so these images, he could see much more clearly this positive image that had come out. It was in the 1970s that the Vatican granted permission for American scientists from Sandia Laboratories in New Mexico and NASA to bring the best equipment they had to examine the shroud for 5 days. And what they discovered there was that there were a number of things that confirmed its authenticity, and they could never reproduce the image. And they were trying to understand, how did this image form on this burial cloth that would have wrapped our Lord in the front, over the top of his head, and over his back? And what they discovered is that it's really like an intense burst of energy that left this scorch on the actual shroud cloth. And it's actually perfectly anatomically correct. An artist could not reproduce this. Even the blood serum separating as it does when it leaves the body, that was anatomically correct. And so all of these things point to the truth of this being the actual burial cloth of Christ, but we don't depend, our faith does not depend on it being authentic. It's one of the things that confirms our faith, however. And as we consider the last of our Lord's words, the seventh word, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, this burial cloth points to all that our Lord endured, his passion, the scourgings that are evident, the crowning with thorns that is evident, the piercing of his feet, his hands, and his side that is evident. So it points to that truth, but it also points that that's not the end of the story, that the end of the story is glory, that our Lord did rise again from the dead. And isn't it interesting that it says when John saw the burial cloths, he saw and he believed, perhaps in a way that he could see that image on that cloth. But as I said, our faith doesn't depend on this or many other things that point to the truths of our faith. The Gospels themselves, 2 of the Gospels were written by companions of Christ, of our Lord. We think of miracles and conversions that have always accompanied the preaching of the gospel. We think of, too, that even in our own day, people are coming to faith in the risen Lord. Why? Because he remains with us all days until the end of the world. And that is indeed good news, that when we come to the end of our lives, that's not the end. We're not extinguished. We're not annihilated, if you will. Know that there's a place prepared for us, that our Lord has gone before. So he entered into his death, and through our baptism we enter into his death, but then we're also going to come to a like resurrection. And you know, the very desires of our heart point to that. God has planted different desires in our heart that are only satisfied in him. We want to be loved. We want perfect beauty and goodness. And we find some elements of that here on this earth, but we long for its perfection, its completion, that we don't want ugliness, and we don't want evil, and we don't want hatred. We want the perfection of these things. So our hearts themselves point to that truth, that they're going to be realized in heaven with our Lord. So dear friends, let us be comforted in the thought that yes, our Lord suffered and died for love of us. But that was not the end of the story. The end of the story is glory.